He left for vacation without her, but when he came back, his entire life was gone. The last week of normal. Ava stood at the front porch, the wind curling her hair around her shoulders, watching the back of the car grow smaller as it moved down the gravel road. Her husband Daniel had just left for the Caribbean, alone, without her. He said he needed time, space, sunlight, a break from everything. What he really meant was a break from her. But Ava didn't cry, not this time. She had cried the night before when he told her he was going without her. She had cried for the way he didn't look her in the eyes anymore, for the fact that she had packed his suitcase while he sat on the edge of the bed scrolling on his phone, and for the silence between them that had grown louder than any argument ever could. Daniel used to be attentive, funny, gentle in the quietest ways, rubbing her back while she cooked, warming her car on winter mornings. But for the past year, something in him had drifted, and Ava had stayed, anchored, waiting for him to come back to her in the emotional sense, long before the physical departure. Their vacation was supposed to be a celebration, 10 years married, 2 decades together, but Daniel said he couldn't wait another week. "I'm suffocating, Ava," he had said. "I need to feel like me again." And so he left. That night, Ava made herself chamomile tea and sat in the kitchen alone. She stared at the empty chair across from her and wondered, how long have I been invisible in my own marriage? The house creaked like it was grieving too. The next morning, she pulled out a notebook and wrote at the top, "What I've been avoiding." It was something her therapist had once told her to do when she felt overwhelmed. List everything you've buried. Confront the small betrayals, the overlooked feelings, the "I'm okay" lies. She started writing. "I miss how he used to touch me without needing anything back. I don't know who I am outside of being his wife. I'm scared that if I leave him, I'll be no one. I'm angry he left so easily. I don't think he's coming back. Not really." Ava stared at the last line, and for the first time, she didn't erase it. The following days passed in strange stillness. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home, and slept. No texts from Daniel, no photos of turquoise beaches. Just a single hollow message 2 days in. "Landed. It's hot here. Hope you're okay." That was it. No, "I miss you." No, "wish you were here." Just weather. By midweek, Ava found herself wandering the house, drawn to things she hadn't touched in years. Daniel's office, the attic, and finally the garage, the one space he always kept locked. "You don't need to deal with the junk in there," he used to say. "It's all tools and old files. Nothing interesting." But as she stared at the rusted lock, she realized something unsettling. She didn't have a single key to it. Not in 10 years. A thought flickered. Why would a husband lock a garage from his own wife? She shook it off, telling herself not to spiral. People need privacy, right? Especially men like Daniel. Organized, methodical, a little controlling. That's just how he was. Still, she couldn't let it go. The next morning, she went to the hardware store, bought a bolt cutter, and stared at it on the kitchen table for an hour before using it. That night, she dreamed of water, of drowning, and Daniel's face turning away as she sank. By Friday, she broke the lock. The hinges groaned as the door opened. The scent of old wood, dust, and something else, something sharp, filled her nose. The garage wasn't filled with tools, not the way she'd expected. Instead, there were boxes, dozens of them, neatly stacked, each labeled in Daniel's precise handwriting. Receipts, work documents, Miss C, and one box, sitting in the center, unlike the rest. No label, just sealed tight with duct tape. Her heart pounded. She sat on the floor. Her hands shook as she peeled back the tape. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. At first glance, they seemed normal. Shots of Daniel on business trips, airport selfies, hotel views. But then she saw a pattern. In each photo, the same woman, sometimes in the background, sometimes beside him, always smiling, blonde, young, unfamiliar. And then, one photo made her breath catch. Daniel, holding hands with the woman, wearing the shirt Ava gave him for their anniversary, the timestamp, 3 weeks ago. She dropped the photo like it burned. But it wasn't the betrayal that hit her hardest. Not yet. It was what she found tucked behind the pictures. A letter, written in Daniel's handwriting. Sealed, addressed to to be opened in case something happens to me. Ava stared at it. Was he planning something, or was this guilt? And more importantly, what exactly had he been hiding? She didn't open the letter, not yet. Something told her this wasn't just about infidelity. It was something else, bigger, darker, and she had just stepped into the very heart of it. The last line of the letter's envelope read, "For Ava, when you're ready." She wasn't sure she ever would be, but she knew this. When Daniel came back from his so-called vacation, nothing would be waiting for him the way he left it. Not the house, not their marriage, not even Ava. Just a version of the truth, the one he tried to bury. When the departure turns into discovery. Janet sat motionless on the edge of the bed, clutching the edge of the blanket as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded in reality. The house was still, far too quiet for a Saturday morning. The kind of silence that echoed with things left unsaid. The kind of silence that swallowed every hope she'd held for the trip they had planned together. The one that would never happen now. 3 days had passed since Michael had left. He said he needed to be alone, that he couldn't breathe anymore, that her enthusiasm about the Bahamas made him feel trapped. It still didn't make sense. They had saved for this vacation for over a year. They had picked out swimsuits together, laughed over whether or not to bring snorkeling gear. It was supposed to be their reset, a way to reconnect after months of distance that neither of them had dared to name. But instead, he left, with the suitcase, with the entire vacation fund transferred to his personal account, and with a look in his eyes Janet hadn't seen since the day they buried his father, a cocktail of grief, guilt, and something darker, something she still couldn't name. She hadn't cried, not yet. She had simply gone back to work, keeping her head down, pretending nothing was wrong. She'd become a master of that. But this morning, something shifted. She woke up earlier than usual and found herself wandering into Michael's office, a space she rarely entered. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, of old coffee, of late-night desperation. The room was neat, almost too neat, but the wastebasket overflowed with crumpled papers, drawings, scribbles, maps, and one note, folded. Tucked under a mug, it read, "Locker 162, Hillcrest Depot. If anything happens, start there." Her breath caught. What was that supposed to mean? Why would he leave such a cryptic message? And why hide it? She stared at it for nearly half an hour before finally grabbing her coat. The Hillcrest Storage Depot was located at the edge of town, a rust-colored compound of metal doors and faded signage. It looked like it hadn't seen an upgrade since the 90s. Janet stood in front of locker 162, keys from the front desk clutched in her sweaty palm. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. Not her sister, not her best friend, not even her therapist. Her heart pounded as she turned the key. The metal creaked. The lock clicked. The door groaned as it rolled open, revealing shadows and the faint smell of wood and dust. At first, she saw nothing but old boxes, labeled files, a dusty bicycle. But then, in the far right corner, something strange. A tall wooden cabinet, antique, ornately carved. It looked completely out of place in this metal tomb. Janet approached it cautiously. She reached out and pulled open the doors. Inside were journals, dozens of them, lined neatly on wooden shelves. Next to them, a series of VHS tapes and a small television with a built-in player. She stood frozen. Why would Michael keep this here? And then came the strangest discovery of all. On the back wall of the cabinet, taped neatly in a plastic sleeve, was a birth certificate. Not his, someone else's. A name she didn't recognize. Lily Jean Stanford, born in 1991. Mother, unknown. Father, Michael Reynolds. Her hands trembled. Michael had a child? A daughter? Why had he never said anything? Why had he hidden this part of his life in a storage unit, buried behind old bikes and forgotten files? She sat down on a nearby stool, her knees buckling beneath her. Her mind raced. She reached for one of the journals. The first entry was dated 2009. It began, "Lily turns 18 today. I wasn't there to see it. I promised myself I'd wait until she was ready, until I was ready. But I wonder, does she even know I exist?" Janet felt the walls of her world shift. Every assumption, every late night, every odd phone call Michael had taken and brushed off. Every business trip that felt a little too vague, too conveniently timed. He had a secret life, or at the very least, a secret past. And now, it was staring her in the face. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. She watched one of the VHS tapes. The grainy image showed a girl, maybe 10 years old, dancing in a backyard, laughing. Michael's voice behind the camera, soft, loving, whispering her name like it was a prayer. Janet cried then, not because of the betrayal, but because of how tender he sounded, how unlike the man who had left her just days before. The man who had slammed the door and flown off to a beach with no goodbye. There was love in his voice, real love, for someone else. And that tore something inside her open. She didn't know what to do next. She stared at the old cabinet, at the tapes, at the journals. Did this child know about him? Was she still alive? Did she hate him? Did she even know she existed in Janet's world? All she had was a name, a birthday, a trail of breadcrumbs in the shape of letters, videos, and grief. But that was enough to start with. Janet locked the storage unit behind her, walked back to her car, and sat in silence. The sun was setting. Michael was somewhere warm, sipping cocktails, basking in the illusion of freedom. And Janet was about to follow the truth. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she needed to understand who she had really married, and who Lily Jean Stanford really was, to Michael, and maybe to her too. A stranger's voice in the dark. Janine stood in the quiet kitchen, her fingertips brushing against the edge of the counter where she once used to leave little love notes for Mark, notes he used to read with a smile, or so she believed. Now the silence pressed heavy on her chest, and even the hum of the refrigerator felt too loud. 3 days had passed since Mark left for his solo escape to Aruba. 3 long, bitter days. Janine hadn't heard a word from him, not a text, not a call, not even one of his typically smug check-ins just to let her know he was surviving the boredom without her. But Janine was not bored. She was unraveling. That morning she'd woken up gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching a pillow instead of a husband. The dream had felt too real. Mark's voice so cold, saying he didn't feel alive anymore around her, that he needed freedom. And then the sound of the door slamming. It echoed in her mind like a cruel soundtrack. But even so, she wasn't crying. Not anymore. She had passed that stage. What came next was colder than sadness. It was clarity. Janine opened her laptop, determined to start drafting a plan, a real one. Not one rooted in hope or waiting or denial. No more planning their couple's finances. No more wondering if she'd get flowers again. Today, she'd begin with something practical. Step 1. Separate accounts. Her hand trembled slightly as she logged into their joint account. But what she saw knocked the wind out of her. The account was empty. Not low, not partially spent. Completely wiped clean. $21,423.32 gone. A scream almost burst from her lungs, but she pushed it down. Not yet. She needed facts. She opened their credit card dashboard. 4 recent transactions. $134 at Diamond and Stone Jewelers, $685 at Resort Marina View, Aruba, $55 for Champagne and Roses delivery, $2,200 flight to Aruba, first class. Her heart thudded like it was trying to break out of her ribcage. She felt heat rising to her face, but her fingers were ice. She clutched the edge of the desk. He didn't just leave her, he funded a fantasy. With their money. A part of her still wanted to deny it. Maybe he was just splurging alone. Maybe the jewelry wasn't for someone else. Maybe the champagne was just a way to feel better. But deep down, Janine already knew. He had left with someone else. And for the first time since she was 19, she felt utterly replaceable. It was late afternoon when she finally allowed herself to walk outside. She needed air, or space, or just the illusion that the world was still moving. The park was mostly empty, save for a man sitting on a bench feeding squirrels. His coat was too big for him, and his beard was unkempt, but his eyes were sharp, observant. As she walked past, he looked up. Their eyes met for a moment. Then he offered a small nod. Janine hesitated. There was something strange in the stillness of his face, a familiarity she couldn't place. "You okay, miss?" the man asked. She paused. "Do I look like I'm not?" He smiled softly. "You look like someone who just lost something they thought was permanent." Janine stared at him, caught off guard by the eerie accuracy. "I lost my husband," she said slowly. "Or maybe I just found out he was never mine." The man nodded again. "Some things break slow. You don't hear the crack until you're already standing in the ruins." His words felt like a stone dropped in a quiet lake, echoing through her. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who's been there." Back at home, Janine took out the box of letters. She had kept them since their first year together. Tucked into envelopes were words from Mark that once made her blush. "You bring light into my chaos. I never knew what home felt like until you. I want to build every tomorrow with you." Now they read like lines from a play he'd once rehearsed, but forgotten how to mean. She threw the first 3 letters into the fireplace. The flames ate them quickly. It didn't hurt as much as she thought it would. She burned 7 more, then paused on one. A postcard from Aruba, from their first trip, 3 years ago. He'd written, "We'll come back every year. Just us." Now he was there, with someone else. She turned the card over and dropped it into the fire. Later that night, unable to sleep, Janine scrolled through her emails. Her fingers froze when she saw a message in her spam folder. Subject: "You don't know me, but I think you should." The sender's name: Harper Blake. The name rang no bells. Her finger hovered, then clicked. Inside was a single line. "I didn't know he was married until I saw your anniversary post on Instagram." Her breath caught. Attached were photos of Mark, holding hands, kissing someone else, in Aruba. Her world tilted. The woman, Harper, was younger. Early 30s maybe. Blonde, petite, stunning in a way that social media thrives on. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the ease in Mark's smile, the kind of ease Janine hadn't seen in years. There was a final line in the message. "I thought you deserved to know. I'm not proud, and I'm not staying." For hours, Janine sat frozen. She should feel hatred, but what she felt more was relief. The weight was no longer on her chest. It had shifted. Something had cracked, and instead of breaking her, it had let her breathe. He wasn't hers anymore, and she didn't want him back. The next morning, a knock came at the door. It was the stranger from the park. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have followed you, but something told me you might need to hear a story." Janine didn't know why, but she let him in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Mark used to scroll through his phone as she served him dinner. The man introduced himself as Elliot. Elliot was once a therapist, retired now after losing his wife. He didn't speak of her in detail, but every time he said her name, May, his eyes softened. "She was the kind of woman who could make flowers grow in sand," he said. "I wanted to be that kind of woman," Janine whispered. Elliot looked at her. "You already are." "But you were watering stone." That night, Janine dreamt of May, a faceless woman in a field of wildflowers, holding a sign that read, "Let go, there's more." In the days that followed, Janine began to clean the house, not just in the usual way, but like she was removing layers of someone else's story. She donated Mark's books, painted the bedroom wall blue, the color of a fresh start, and in a quiet moment, she pulled a small box from the back of the closet. Inside were brochures from 5 years ago, a business idea she once shelved. Art for everyone, a mobile art therapy studio. Mark said it wasn't practical, but now she had nothing left to lose. She reopened the folder, revised the plan. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to start over. A week later, Mark came back, tanned, smiling, with flowers in hand. "Miss me?" he said. Janine didn't answer. He looked around. "What's going on here?" She handed him a document. He opened it. Divorce papers. "You can't be serious," he scoffed. "I am," she said softly. "I was coming back. I needed time." Janine's voice was calm but steady. "No, you needed permission to leave, and you didn't ask for it. I made a mistake." "No," she said. "You made a choice." He stared at her. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Janine smiled. "I already regret waiting this long." That night, she slept peacefully, for the first time in years. She didn't know if love would come again, but she knew she'd never forget how it felt to find herself again, in the silence, in the ashes, and in the voice of a stranger who reminded her she was worth more than staying small for someone else's comfort. The stranger who knew too much. It had been 3 days since Emma's confrontation with Liam. 3 days since she slammed the door shut on the man who chose a beach over his wife. And in those 3 days, something inside her had shifted, slowly but undeniably. She no longer woke up feeling the weight of confusion or betrayal. Instead, A new kind of silence filled the house. Not the haunting silence of abandonment, but the stillness that often comes right before a seed breaks open underground, ready to grow. Emma began moving with quiet purpose. Each morning she brewed her coffee, sat by the window, and journaled. It was something she hadn't done in years. Her first few pages were nothing but scribbles, incoherent, angry, messy. But eventually the words began to form patterns, reflections, truths, things she'd kept buried for far too long. That afternoon, as she folded the laundry, the doorbell rang. It startled her, not because someone was there, but because she realized how long it had been since she'd expected anyone. She opened the door to find a man she didn't recognize, maybe mid-60s, lean frame, sharp eyes. He wasn't smiling, but there was something familiar in his gaze. "Mrs. Emma Collins?" he asked. "Yes. My name is Henry Ward. I was a friend of your father-in-law, Robert." Emma's heart skipped. Robert, Liam's father, had passed away 3 years ago. She had loved that man like her own dad. He'd always treated her with kindness. But after his death, Liam had changed, bitter, withdrawn, suspicious. "May I come in for just a few minutes?" Henry asked, his voice calm. Emma hesitated. Everything in her life lately had felt like a trap, but something about this man felt sincere. She nodded and stepped aside. They sat in the living room, Henry with a leather folder in hand, Emma with a guarded posture. "I won't waste your time," he said. "I promised Robert I would wait exactly 3 years after his passing, and then give you this." He slid the folder across the table. Emma looked at it, then back at him. "What is it?" "A story and a secret." Robert never trusted his son, not fully, and he knew that one day you would need the truth. Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were photographs, letters, bank statements, old journals, documents she had never seen before. The first letter was addressed to her in Robert's handwriting. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and that Liam has continued down the path I feared." Emma's breath caught. The letter went on to detail things Robert had suspected about Liam: his financial manipulations, possible infidelity, shady investments, and the manipulation of Emma's trust. "He told me he once saw Liam copying your signature," the man added gently. "But he couldn't prove it then, so he waited, and asked me to keep track, just in case." Emma sat in stunned silence. Henry leaned forward. "Emma, you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. Everything you've been feeling, the gaslighting, the confusion, the guilt, it was orchestrated. Liam is not who he pretended to be." A wave of heat rose through her chest, anger, shame, and oddly, relief. "I thought I was the problem," she whispered. "He told me I was dramatic, that I didn't understand him, that I was too controlling." Henry nodded. "That's what they do, make you question your own instincts until you become paralyzed." Emma's hands tightened into fists. "What do I do with all this?" she asked. Henry's voice lowered. "You fight back, not with anger, but with truth, with proof, with the strength you didn't know you had." He stood up to leave. Before he reached the door, he turned and said something Emma would never forget. Robert always said, Emma was the only real light in Liam's life, and one day she'll shine so bright that he won't be able to hide anymore. After he left, Emma sat alone in her living room for hours, the folder still open beside her. The betrayal now had evidence, the confusion now had clarity, and for the first time in years, she had something Liam never expected her to have: power. She spent the next few days going through the documents, cross-referencing dates, scanning account numbers. Everything Liam had done, every lie, every hidden account, every fake business expense was right there. And with it, her fear began to melt away. She hired a lawyer, quietly, a woman named Amanda, fierce, brilliant, and empathetic. Emma brought her everything. Amanda looked through it and shook her head in disbelief. "This is enough to not only win the divorce, but potentially freeze his assets. You've got him cornered, Emma." Emma felt the tears rising. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were the kind that came when a prisoner saw the first crack of light through a cell wall. That night she slept deeply for the first time in months. Meanwhile, Liam was living his freedom, or so he thought. But paradise, it seemed, had a short shelf life. His new girlfriend, Bella, wasn't the carefree spirit he'd fantasized about. She was demanding, moody, bored. "You're always checking your phone," she whined. "Didn't you say you wanted to escape your old life?" He snapped back. "I'm just managing some stuff. Chill." But Bella didn't chill. She grew suspicious. Started asking questions. One night, she snooped through his bag and found Emma's name on a legal envelope. She wasn't dumb. "You're still married?" she screamed. Liam tried to lie, but his eyes gave him away. Bella packed her things the next morning, taking his credit card on her way out. Back home, Emma was preparing, not just for legal battles, but for life. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since college. Started volunteering at a local art therapy center for women. She even took a self-defense class, just in case, she told Amanda with a wink. Neighbors noticed the change. "You're glowing, Emma," they'd say. And she was, because while Liam was unraveling, Emma was rebuilding, brick by brick, step by step. She wasn't surviving anymore, she was rising. And just when she thought she was done being surprised by life, it surprised her again. One afternoon, after teaching an art workshop, she returned home to find a letter in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo, a candid shot of her standing in front of the community center, laughing with a group of kids. On the back, a note. "Don't stop shining. Someone's always watching. D." Her breath caught. D? Could it be Dylan? The stranger she met months ago. The man who showed her kindness when she was at her lowest? She hadn't seen him since he left, but he'd left a mark, deeper than she'd realized. That night, she couldn't sleep, because for the first time in a long time, the future didn't scare her. It intrigued her. The return of the uninvited. It had been nearly a month since Emma last thought of Liam without feeling a sharp pang of pain. Now, his name barely stirred anything in her. Not anger, not longing, just silence. Her days were filled with purpose. She taught at the art therapy center twice a week. She ran small workshops on creative healing, and she had started walking every morning. Crisp air, no headphones, just the sound of her own breath. But on a cloudy Thursday morning, something shattered that fragile peace. Emma had just come back from the market, her arms full of groceries, her keys jangling in her hand. She pushed the door open, humming softly to herself, and stopped cold. Sitting at her kitchen table was Liam. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't have a key anymore. She had changed the locks. How did he get in? "Hi, Em," he said, casually, as if nothing had ever happened, as if he hadn't disappeared with another woman, as if he hadn't stolen from her. Emma's hands tightened around the grocery bags until the plastic dug into her skin. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. Liam stood up, shrugged. "I just needed to see you." "No, Liam. You needed money, or shelter, or forgiveness, but you didn't need me." He flinched. She noticed. "Good." "Look," he said, taking a few steps forward. "I messed up, okay? I know that now. But I've been thinking, maybe we could just talk. You and me, like before." Emma let out a laugh, dry, humorless. "Like before?" she echoed. "Before you drained our savings? Before you lied about needing space while you took your mistress to the Bahamas? Before you looked me in the eye and told me you were tired of my optimism?" She dropped the grocery bags on the counter with a loud thud. "I'm not that woman anymore, Liam, and this isn't your home." Liam's face darkened. His charm, thin as ever, cracked like ice. "So what, you're just going to erase me?" He stepped closer. Emma didn't back down. "I'm divorcing you, Liam. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, and if you try to pull anything, I have documentation, evidence, witnesses." He laughed bitterly. "You've got some nerve." "No," she said, her voice steady. "What I've got is clarity." Just then, there was a knock on the door. Emma didn't flinch. She knew who it was. She walked past Liam, opened the door, and there stood Amanda, her lawyer, flanked by a quiet, broad-shouldered man Emma had never seen before. "Everything all right here?" Amanda asked, locking eyes with Liam. "We were just finishing up," Emma said coolly. Amanda stepped inside. "Mr. Collins, I suggest you leave. You're not welcome here. And legally, you're trespassing." Liam opened his mouth to protest, but the man beside Amanda stepped forward, big, silent, unblinking. Liam paused, then scoffed. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Emma met his eyes. "No, I already regretted staying." He left without another word. That night, Emma didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't tremble. She stood at her sink, washing vegetables, soft jazz playing in the background. Because peace is often louder in its quiet than chaos ever was in its storm. And as she sat down with her dinner and her journal, she wrote one sentence. I am finally free from the ghost of what never was. Meanwhile, across the city, Liam sat alone in a cheap motel room. His bags were unpacked. His phone buzzed with messages from debt collectors. He tried calling Bella, straight to voicemail. He opened Instagram. She had blocked him. He stood by the window, watching the traffic below. Everything Emma had become, everything he had underestimated, was now haunting him. And for the first time in years, he felt what Emma had felt all along. Powerless, small, expendable. Back in her world, Emma was blooming. But her thoughts kept circling back to one thing. The letter. The photo. Signed only D. She couldn't explain it, but her heart kept whispering a name she hadn't said in months. Dylan. The man who'd entered her life like a shadow. Quiet, gentle, lost, and yet somehow more present than anyone she had known in years. She thought of the way he'd spoken about his daughter, about grief, about hope, how his eyes had glistened when she told him, "You don't have to stay broken." Where was he now? One rainy afternoon, while Emma was organizing old workshop materials, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. Hello? Emma? The voice was deeper than she remembered, but unmistakable. Dylan? There was a pause, a breath caught between surprise and something gentler. I didn't think you'd remember my voice. Emma sat down, gripping the edge of the table. How could I forget? Another pause. I'm in town, he said softly. I've been meaning to come by, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me. She closed her eyes. I do. An hour later, she stood at her front porch, heart pounding. A car pulled up slowly, and out stepped Dylan. Not the disheveled man she once took in on a cold night, but someone transformed. His hair was neatly cut, his coat was clean, his eyes, still carrying sorrow, also shimmered with something else, peace. Emma didn't wait. She walked toward him, arms open, and for a long moment neither of them said a word. They just held on, not like strangers, not like friends, but like two souls who had seen each other at their worst and still believed in each other's best. That night, over cups of herbal tea and soft conversation, Dylan told her everything. He had returned to work, not in the Secret Service, but in community outreach, helping veterans, ex-convicts, and people who'd lost their way. I kept thinking about what you said, he admitted. That guilt isn't a punishment. It's a sign that you still care. Emma smiled, tears touching the corners of her eyes. And I kept thinking about your kindness, she whispered. The way you saw me, when I didn't even know I was disappearing. Dylan reached for her hand, and for the first time, neither of them felt alone. A past unearthed, a future rewritten. Emma never believed healing came in a straight line. Some days felt like progress, others, like falling backward into a hole she thought she had already climbed out of. But Dylan's return had stirred something she hadn't dared to name. Hope. They saw each other often after that first visit, sometimes just for a cup of tea. Other times he'd tag along to her workshops, quietly helping behind the scenes. It was never loud, never dramatic, but steady and real. Still, Emma couldn't shake a strange curiosity. Who was Dylan before she met him? He had told her about the accident, the drinking, the homelessness, but not much else. So one evening, as they were walking by the lakeside park, she finally asked, Dylan, can I ask you something personal? He glanced at her, a small smile on his lips. You can ask me anything. What did you do before everything? I mean, before your family, before the fall? He paused, then looked out over the water. I was a profiler, he said softly. FBI. Emma stopped walking. You were in the FBI? He nodded. Worked violent crimes mostly, behavioral analysis. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. I could read people, predict things, but it messed with my head after a while. He turned back to her, eyes filled with memories. When I lost them, I couldn't look at another case file. I couldn't analyze another murderer. I didn't want to know the darkness anymore. I was already living in mine. Emma reached for his hand. He let her. You never told me. You never asked, he said with a sad smile. They stood in silence, watching the water ripple. Then he added, but I've been helping again, quietly, off the books. Amanda, your lawyer, she introduced me to a network. People who want to disappear safely, abuse survivors, women running from dangerous partners. I helped them start over. Emma's heart thudded. All this time, you were helping people? Dylan nodded. And I never forgot how you helped me first. Later that week, Emma got a call from Amanda. It wasn't good news. Liam is contesting the divorce, Amanda said bluntly. And he's trying to claim part of the house. Emma's stomach dropped. He can't. This was my parents' house. It's in my name. Amanda sighed. He's alleging you used joint funds to renovate, that you promised it would be shared. It's messy. And he hired a pretty aggressive attorney. Emma sat down, pressing a hand to her temple. I don't have the energy for this. That's why you have me, Amanda said. But be careful. I've seen men like him before. When they lose control, they get unpredictable. Emma hung up the phone and stared out the window. For the first time in weeks, she felt the old fear creeping back in. That evening, she told Dylan everything. He listened, quiet, focused. When she finished, he asked one question. Has he ever been violent with you? Emma hesitated. No, but he could be cruel, manipulative. He pushed buttons, made me feel small. Sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dylan nodded, jaw tightening. I'll protect you, he said simply. Emma laughed softly. You already have. A week passed, then two. Emma tried to focus on her work, her art, her quiet moments with Dylan. But Liam loomed in the background like a storm cloud. Until one night, the storm came. It was late, past midnight. Emma was reading by the fireplace when a noise outside made her jump. Footsteps, heavy, drunken. Then, the door rattled, followed by a loud bang. She froze. Another bang. Then a voice, slurred and angry. Emma, open this damn door. We need to talk. It was Liam. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Please, pick up, she whispered, dialing Dylan's number. He answered on the first ring. Stay inside. Lock the door. I'm 5 minutes away. Another bang. Emma backed away from the door. Liam shouted something incoherent. She heard glass shatter. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Then, headlights. Dylan's car screeched into the driveway. Two men got out. Dylan, and someone she didn't recognize. Tall, muscular, moving with practiced calm. Liam barely had time to turn before he was restrained. Emma watched through the window, tears spilling down her cheeks as Liam shouted obscenities until his voice became a pathetic mumble. Dylan didn't say a word, just held her afterward. You're safe now, he whispered. Emma buried her face in his coat and finally let go. The restraining order was filed the next day. Amanda moved swiftly. By the weekend, Liam was ordered to stay 500 feet away at all times. Emma sat across from Dylan at the kitchen table that Sunday morning, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. I never realized how much I let him control me, she whispered. That's what abusers do, Dylan said gently. They don't need fists. They use fear, doubt, silence. She looked up at him. I want my life back, Dylan. You already have it, he said. But now, you can build something new. They spent that week clearing out the attic, not because it needed cleaning, but because Emma wanted a fresh start. In one box, she found her mother's journals. In another, her dad's old cassette tapes. They played one while they worked. A mix of soft rock and laughter. Her father had recorded over the music with goofy commentary. It made her laugh through tears. Later that night, as they sat under the stars with blankets and cocoa, Emma whispered, I never thought I could feel this again. What? Dylan asked. Safe, she said. Hopeful. Home. Dylan looked at her, eyes soft. You deserve all of that, and more. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was from Liam's lawyer. He had dropped the contest, relinquished the house, disappeared again. Amanda called her, voice surprised. Did you scare him somehow? Emma smiled, looking out the window at Dylan tinkering with the garden lights. No, she said. I just stopped being scared of him. That night, Dylan cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just roasted vegetables and pasta. But it was the first time Emma hadn't cooked for anyone in years. "I hope this isn't terrible," he said, placing the plate in front of her. She took one bite. "It's amazing." They ate in candlelight, soft music playing, the kind of night that didn't need words. Later, as they washed dishes side by side, Dylan dried his hands and turned to her. "Emma," he said, voice low, "I don't want to rush anything, but I want you to know something." She looked up. "You changed my life," he said. "You didn't just give me shelter. You gave me a reason to come back to life." Emma's breath caught. "And you," she whispered, "you reminded me what it's like to be seen, not used, not tolerated. Seen." He leaned forward, and for the first time, they kissed. Slow, gentle, like two people finding each other in the ruins, and realizing they were home. The house he never expected. As Kevin stepped out of the car, the familiar sound of gravel crunching beneath his shoes stirred something unexpected inside him. The air was different. Still, quiet, thick with an emotion he couldn't place. This was the house he had left behind a week ago with a single suitcase and a self-serving mission. But it didn't feel like the same place anymore. The windows sparkled in the late afternoon sun, the garden had been trimmed, and the porch, which had always had one or two old shoes or tools strewn about, was immaculate. For a moment, Kevin thought he had the wrong address. He blinked. No, this was home, or at least it had been. When he stepped inside, the change was even more jarring. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, mixed with a faint hint of lavender. The living room, once dim and cluttered with his things, now felt open and inviting. Soft music played somewhere in the background. And yet, the silence wrapped around him like a shroud. No one came to greet him. "Alicia?" he called out. His voice echoed in a house that suddenly felt too big. A few seconds later, his eyes caught something on the hallway table, a stack of papers held down by a single house key. He picked them up, his fingers trembling. It was a letter. "Kevin, by the time you read this, I'll have already made peace with what happened. I don't know who you are anymore. Maybe I never really did. But I know who I am now. And I know what I deserve. This house, this life, was never just yours to walk in and out of like a hotel lobby. It was supposed to be our safe place. And you turned it into a waiting room, waiting for you to come home, waiting for you to choose me, waiting for you to remember how we started. I'm done waiting." He sank into the nearest chair, the pages trembling in his grip. Upstairs, Alicia stood by the window of the guest bedroom in her sister's house, watching the sky change color. She had thought she would feel triumphant, maybe even vindicated, but all she felt was an unexpected calm. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her lawyer. "Divorce petition accepted, initial hearing scheduled for next week. No going back now." Kevin remained in that chair for over an hour, rereading the letter. Each time, the words hit differently. At first, he was angry. How dare she leave like this? Then, he felt disbelief. She had always forgiven him before. Then, the weight of reality settled in. She was really gone. He wandered the house like a ghost. In the bedroom, he found half the closet empty. In the bathroom, her side of the sink had been cleared, leaving only the small, familiar bottle of her lavender perfume. He sprayed it once, instinctively, and instantly regretted it. Meanwhile, Alicia sat with her sister, sipping tea and staring out at the quiet neighborhood. "You okay?" her sister asked. "I think I am, for the first time in a long time." Kevin didn't sleep that night. He sat in the backyard, under the string lights Alicia had begged him to put up 3 summers ago, nursing a glass of scotch and trying to silence the voice in his head that said, "You did this." As dawn approached, he checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts he had ignored from Alicia. Old messages, ones where she tried to explain how lonely she felt, ones where she asked him to talk, to open up, to just be present. He had silenced those messages with busyness, excuses, and eventually, with betrayal. Now, there was nothing left to silence. The next morning, Kevin drove to the old pier where they had first met. He sat at the edge, watching the waves, hoping the sound of the water might drown out the echo of her final words. "I'm done waiting." He knew he couldn't undo what he'd done, but for the first time, he wondered what healing might look like. Not just for Alicia, but for himself. The house he came back to had changed, because she had changed. And now he would have to decide if he was ready to change too. The day he came back, everything had already changed. The knock at the door came just as the wind began to howl again, echoing eerily through the empty trees. It was early evening, and the house glowed warmly with the gentle amber of Janine's favorite corner lamps. She stood still in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of cinnamon tea, staring at the door like it might disappear if she blinked. She wasn't expecting anyone. Not tonight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed the mug down and approached the door. Her instincts whispered, not danger, but change. When she opened it, she didn't flinch. Standing there with 2 suitcases and a sheepish half-smile was Andrew, her husband, or rather, the man who had been her husband. Janine said nothing for a long moment. She simply looked at him, not with anger, not even with heartbreak. Just stillness. Andrew shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I didn't think you'd answer," he said, voice low. "You weren't expected," she replied, calm as still water. "I came back early, He hesitated, searching her face for an opening, some sign of the Janine who once adored him. "I thought about everything, every day, and I realized I'd made a mistake." The wind outside howled louder, as if nature itself was mocking him. Janine folded her arms, standing in the soft glow of her own peace. "What kind of mistake, Andrew? The one where you emptied our savings account and flew to Aruba with a woman you barely knew? Or the kind where you told me I wouldn't understand what you were going through because I was too happy?" He flinched. "I didn't come here to fight," he muttered. "Good," she said gently. "Because there's nothing to fight about." He looked past her into the warm, inviting home he had once taken for granted. His eyes paused on the dining table. A candle was still burning. 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 sets of silverware. "Is someone here?" Janine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head and asked, "Do you really care?" He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, walking back toward the living room slowly, "that whatever you're looking for, comfort, redemption, a second chance, it's not here." Andrew stepped into the threshold. "So what now? You're just going to erase me?" "No," she said, turning back with a softness in her voice that disarmed him. "You erased yourself the day you chose to leave." He sank onto the edge of the entry bench, suddenly looking older than he had a week ago. "I thought I needed time, space." Janine nodded. "You did, and I gave it to you. But time didn't stop for me, Andrew. While you were searching for yourself in beach resorts and cocktails, I found something too." He looked up. "What did you find?" She paused, a wistful smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Strength, clarity, and kindness from the most unexpected place. Just then, the hallway creaked with soft footsteps. Dylan appeared, casual, holding a book in one hand and wearing Janine's late father's old sweater. He stopped mid-step, surprised by the sight of Andrew. Andrew stood up. "Who is this?" Janine's voice was even. "This is someone who knows how to say thank you. Someone who knows how to show up." Dylan, respectful and calm, nodded. "I'll give you 2 a moment." He turned to leave, but Janine touched his arm gently. "No, you don't have to go." Andrew's mouth opened, but no words came out. He saw it then. The look in Janine's eyes, the peace in her face. She wasn't his anymore. She had let go. And maybe, just maybe, that was what broke him. He put down his suitcase. "I'll go," he said hoarsely. "But if I write, would you read it?" Janine tilted her head. "If it's the truth?" He nodded, lips pressed tight, and then he walked away, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the house. Janine turned to Dylan, who was now watching her with a quiet kind of awe. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "More than okay." There was silence between them, the kind that feels like safety. Then Dylan said softly, "You know, I think that night on the bench, the snowstorm, the tea, your kindness, it saved me." Janine smiled. "And you saved me right back." They both knew life wouldn't be a fairy tale from here on. There would be challenges, griefs to heal, wounds to tend. But there was something unshakable between them now. 2 people who had known loss, betrayal, and brokenness, but had chosen still to be kind, to try again. That night, as they sat in the living room, tea in hand, a quiet song playing from the record player, Janine leaned her head against Dylan's shoulder, not because she needed him to save her, but because now she finally knew what it felt like to be seen. And across town, in a small motel room, Andrew sat staring at the ceiling. He had everything, until he didn't. And now he would have to live with the one truth that hurt most. Sometimes, when you leave too soon, you come back too late. So what do you think? If you were Janine, would you have opened that door? Do people like Andrew deserve second chances? Or are some choices too selfish to forgive? Let us know in the comments below. Because sometimes, the biggest decisions in life aren't made with anger, but with peace. And peace is the final answer.